Thank you everyone for being here. I hope the online people can hear us. If you hear us, please let us know, show a reaction or something. You're good? Okay, perfect. Thank you everyone for being here today. Today, Dr. Perry Klein with his colleagues here from Catholic School Board. Joining us for a talk that is about teaching meaning focused grammar, improve grade 1 sentence complexity and written expression. Before starting, I just want to mention that Dr. Klein and their colleagues are going to give a talk, and then at the end we have a Q&A session. You can ask your question. The online people can also unmute themselves and ask questions. Before starting, we would like to acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional territories of Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Chenanton nations, on land connected with the London Township and Canberra treaties of 1796 and the dish with one spoon, coven wampum. This land continued to be home to diverse indigenous people who are recognized as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contribution of our society. With that, I will transfer the floor to Dr. Klein.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Mally. And thanks to Mally and her team for their help in organizing the talk today. I'd like to introduce my two colleagues from the London District Catholic School Board. We're partners on this research. So Dill, do you want to wave to the camera? This is Dill Troop. She's the student achievement teacher for early literacy, K-2, and Carolyn Musio, the coordinator of elementary program. Okay, so the research that we're going to be talking about today is part of a program that we've been working on in our partnership over the last 6 years, and it focuses on early intervention in writing. The purpose of this research program is to give all grade 1s a successful start in writing. So we've been working on it for several years. Our first project in 2019 focused on teaching beginning writers strategies for writing, and we found that was effective for kids in the lower third, middle third, and lower third, middle third, and upper third of writing achievement. 2020, it was COVID, so we were online in virtual classrooms, and we found that Tier 1 and Tier 2 instruction were each effective for helping kids to learn writing strategies. Summer of 2020, we did an online tutoring program for students at the end of grade 1 who had writing difficulties. And we were able to produce medium-sized gains in their handwriting and spelling and large gains in their written composition. 2022, we were back in the regular classroom with Tier 1 and Tier 2 instruction. And we looked at the effect of that instruction on handwriting, spelling, and composition, as well as looking at the effect of that instruction with students who ranged in skill levels from low to high on each of those skills. And then today we're talking about our work in 2023 on the syntax project. So I'll just turn things over to Carolyn now to talk about the curriculum context of that in her Board of Education.
Thanks, Perry. I just wanted to briefly say that this years-long research partnership aligned with our broader system goals of shifting to taking a structured literacy approach to teaching reading. So it began in 2020, and I do want to acknowledge with much support from speech and language pathologists in our board who advocated tirelessly for this shift. So we began in 2020 and have been building on that over the years. Even prior to that, Perry, you taught us that printing and handwriting fluency were important for children's, the quality of children's writing. So I think maybe 2018, 2019, we had teachers providing prep and planning coverage in K-3 classrooms, explicitly teaching printing and handwriting skills to students.
Thanks, Carolyn. So our work on teaching written composition was informed by Young-Suk Kim's theoretical framework of the interactive dynamic literacy model. I think Dr. Kim is in the audience today. So in this model, literacy is conceptualized as being at 4 levels. There's a sublexical level, so skills below the level of the word. The lexical level is skills related to the word level, the sentence level, and then the discourse level. So discourse is language above the level of the sentence. So for example, children's ability to read and write narrative or persuasive texts. Within each of those levels of the model, reading and writing are considered to be closely linked and to contribute to one another. And at each level, oral language feeds into children's literacy skills. The part of the model that's particularly relevant for our presentation today is the relationship between written sentence production and written expression or composition of the text as a whole. According to this model, written sentence production has a direct impact on written composition, and written sentence production also is thought to mediate the effect of more basic skills on written sentence production. There's been some previous descriptive research on the writing of beginning writers in grade 1. So in grade 1, students writing, the sentences tend to be on average 1 clause in length, an average of 5 words per clause. It's common for grade 1 students to write sentence fragments or rambling sentences. For grade 1s, the concept of a sentence is unclear. So for example, it's common for grade 1 students to be asked to put a capital at the beginning of their sentence and a period at the end. But for grade 1s, the meaning of a sentence and the boundary are unclear. Their use of capitals and punctuations tends to be inconsistent. And some students are not yet writing sentences. So for example, in our study, at the beginning of the study, about 20% of students hadn't started to write sentences yet. In Ontario in 2023, a new literacy curriculum was introduced, and it had extensive expectations for teaching grammar and sentence writing. At the grade 1 level, most of those expectations are just introduction. Students are introduced to the skills. And they're the sorts of skills we might expect in grade 1 for the most part. So for example, writing simple sentences, capital letters, punctuation at the end of the sentence, but also being introduced to compound sentences and beginning to learn parts of speech or grammatical elements, which are more challenging. Ontario has taken a contemporary approach to teaching grammar in the sense that the focus is on grammar for communication. If you were in elementary school decades ago, you might have had the experience of being taught grammar primarily by analyzing sentences. So we would be given sentences and we had to learn to identify the nouns, the verbs, the adjectives, and so on. But the contemporary approach that Ontario has adopted is more meaning oriented. And so the idea is that students should learn grammar as subordinate to their use of it in communication. So to illustrate what that means, we've created a little cartoon here. This girl's writing a sentence and she says to herself, I can make my sentence more interesting. So there's the communication goal. And she says, by telling the where and the when. So that's beginning to move toward learning prepositional phrases. There's some previous research on sentence and grammar instruction, but experiments in this area have been entirely at the mid-elementary and late elementary level. No previous research on beginning writers. Mostly research with small groups, mostly with students who have exceptionalities, such as dyslexia. The instructional methods in this research have been, in some cases, traditional grammar instruction, and in other cases, sentence combining. Sentence combining is a method of teaching students sentences where they begin with simple clauses and they learn to combine those into compound and complex sentences. The outcomes that are usually studied in this literature are sentence complexity. So words per clause is a common measure of that, and clauses per T unit or sentence, and also the holistic quality of their written composition. But sentence writing is usually actually taught in grade 1 to intact classes. And so Ritchie and colleagues wrote a review of this literature in 2023, and they noted that discrepancy. And so they called for experimental research on teaching sentences to beginning writers. And so we think that our study is actually the first experiment on teaching sentences to grade 1 students. At the time we started, the Syntax project had just been published. The Syntax project is a Creative Commons resource that was created by Australian teachers. This was a project that was led by Stephanie Lalivre, who I think was a vice principal at that time. It's comprised of a series of units for teaching sentence writing and grammar. And it covers a range of years from what Australians would call pre-foundations to year 6, roughly equivalent to Ontario JK through grade 6. And it's aligned with the Ontario approach in that it emphasizes the communicative function of grammar. So the idea is to teach students to make their sentences more interesting and more informative for readers. And the means of doing that is teaching them grammar and showing them how to use those grammatical elements to add words, phrases, and clauses into their sentences. So we wanted to test the effectiveness of the Syntax project. This was Dill and Carolyn's idea. So we planned a project, and our research questions were, does the Syntax project foundations level was similar to Ontario grade 1, does it increase the grammatical complexity and correctness of student sentences? Does it increase the quality and the length of their written composition? Is it effective for students with a range of initial skill levels? And does it have social validity for teachers? Do teachers perceive it as valuable and effective? So now I'm going to turn things over to Carolyn to talk about the method for our study.
Thanks, Perry. 10 classrooms participated in this study, and a waiting list control design was used. All classes were pre-tested on sentence and story writing skills, as well as spelling, oral vocabulary, and oral sentences. In phase 1, the teachers in the experimental group taught 2 lessons a week from the Syntax project, while the other 5 classes continued with regular writing instruction. In phase 2, teachers in the waiting list control group taught 2 lessons a week from the Syntax project. All students were post-tested on the same skills. Our main hypothesis was that each group would make greater gains in sentence writing skills during their instructional period. The advantage of a waitlist control group design is that all students receive the instruction, whereas in a traditional experiment, the control group doesn't receive the instruction. And we did want all students to have the opportunity for these lessons because we hypothesized that they would be valuable and have an impact on their writing skill. This graph illustrates our hypothesis that group 1 would make more gains in phase 1 and group 2 would make gains mostly in phase 2. One of the disadvantages about using this study design is that phase 2 isn't as clean. So for example, there could be carryover effects in phase 2 for the group that received instruction in phase 1. As Perry mentioned earlier, the Syntax project materials were created by a group of teachers from Australia from 17 different primary schools, and the materials are free online. One of the things that drew us to the Syntax project was that the lessons use the 3 components of explicit instruction: modeling, practice, and supports. Each lesson is about 20 minutes long, and the lessons are highly interactive. So there's lots of opportunities for students to talk with each other, to respond using hand signals, or on a whiteboard in their notebook, and for the educator to provide feedback to students. We love that there were slide decks already created for each lesson. This is an example of one of the slides. Each slide has icons that cue the teacher and students about how they're going to interact with the content. So in this example, the students are going to track the words as the teacher reads to them. Then they're going to pair share to review the content with a partner. And finally, the teacher will choose a student randomly to share back with the class. Here are all of the icons that are used in the Syntax project. And you can see that the program does elicit frequent responses from the students. So it promotes a high degree of interactivity. The research team here created simplified slide decks from the original Syntax project slide decks. So they, not me, the research team, chunked the information out over several slides and put some of the information for teachers into the note sections. They also animated some of the slides just to make, we thought, the slides a little less visually stimulating all at once. So on the screen, you'll see an example of an original slide from the Syntax project. And here's how the research team modified that slide over several. There's a scope and sequence for the Syntax project. And for this research study, as Perry said, we use the foundational level resources. So Dill is going to show us what a typical Syntax project lesson looks like.
Question, because each lesson takes one 20-minute period, so you do 2 20-minute lessons a week?
Yes, that's what we did in the study. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So, is this going to work? Can you hear me? Okay. I feel like I'm the entertainment portion of this research project. So, we thought maybe the best way to explain what happened is to show you. So you're going to experience this. I'm going to ask you to play along. I'm the grade 1 teacher and you're the kids. So let's start. Oh, how about we go in the right order? So every lesson starts with setting the goal, right? So we are learning to speak in full sentences. I want to just make a note here why I love this so much. When we talk about, notice it's saying we speak in full sentences. So no one's writing yet. All of this is going to be oral. Why? Because there's a lot kids have to do when they write. I have to think about the word. I have to figure out how to spell it. So to kind of reduce that cognitive load, the lessons all start orally. So we're going to follow these icons. I'm going to read the sentence. We are learning to speak in full sentence. And now I'm going to invite you to read that back. Everybody all together. We are learning to speak in full sentences. Amazing. Okay. A sentence is a complete thought that makes sense. We're going to read that together. A sentence is a complete thought that makes sense. How about we read that to our partner? Yeah, you're going to tell each other what a sentence is.
A sentence is a complete thought that makes sense.
Awesome. And then I'm going to say, Perry, what's a sentence, Perry?
A sentence is a complete thought that makes sense.
Amazing. Good job, Perry. Okay. Now we're going to break that down a little bit more. So a sentence must make sense. It needs to have a who or a what and a what doing. So let's do that together. A sentence must
Make sense.
have a who
or what
and a what doing. talk to your elbow partner. What does a sentence have to have? Yeah, you're doing that.
It has to have, it has to make sense. It has to have a who or a what and a what doing.
And then I would say,
So it
Julia,
makes sense.
can you share with the class, what does a sentence have to have?
Make sense, have a who or a what, and a what doing.
Amazing. Okay, here we go. So let's practice. Okay, I'm going to read the sentence and then we're going to read it together. We're going to clap out for each word. Okay, ready? I'm going to do it first. The dog is barking. Everybody, the dog is barking. Can you read that to your partner?
That dog is
yeah.
barking.
See? And then I'm going to say, Lisa, can you read that sentence for us? Great job. Okay. Well, I needed a clicker. Okay, let's try this one. So you're going to see multiple examples. We're going to keep doing this. Like I'll cut it short. Okay, so we're going to do this one. The birds are singing in the tree. Let's do that together. The birds are singing in the tree with your partners.
Birds are singing in the tree.
Okay, Molly, tell us, can you read this sentence? Or yeah, you didn't think you were going to participate. Amazing. Okay. Yeah, I needed to be clicking with you, sorry. Okay, I think this is our last one. So again, note, I'm still on concept development. We're still learning, right? So Ben and Raj are laughing. Let's do it together.
Ben and Raj are laughing.
To your partners.
And
Carolyn, let's read this sentence out loud.
Ben and Raj are laughing.
Great job. So a sentence must, everybody, make sense, have a who or what, and a what doing. Share that with your partner. What's a sentence have to have?
Have a who or a what and a what.
What doing?
Guess what? Teresa, tell us, what does a sentence have to have? Amazing. Okay. So now pay attention here. This is I do. So now we're going to start embedding that gradual release, right? So watch me. I'm going to identify the who and the do. So I'm going to read the sentence. The dog barked. Everybody, let's read it together.
The dog barked.
No, don't do that. Okay. The who in my sentence is the talk to your partner. What do you think the who is in this sentence? Okay. Perry, who's the who? Or what's the who?
The dog?
Very good. And what is the doing? What's the dog doing? Tell your partner what you think the dog is doing. Julia, can you tell us what's the dog doing? Yes, the dog barked. Okay, so now we're going to do this one. We're going to do together. Okay, so I'm going to read it. The birds sing. Everybody?
The birds
sang.
Okay, with your elbow partner, what's the who of the sentence? Talk about that with your partner. Yeah, everybody, what's the who?
Bird.
Okay, and what's the do of the sentence?
Sang.
Yeah, the bird sang. Great, let's try this one. The tree swayed. Everybody?
The tree
swayed.
Okay, with your elbow partner, what's the who of the sentence? And what's the do of the sentence? Okay, so Teresa, can you read the sentence? The who is? The do? Okay, so let's try this again. A sentence must make sense, have a who and a what, or what, and a what doing. Everybody, a sentence must
Make sense, have a who or what, and a what doing.
Okay, how about, I feel like we've done it with our partners, so I would just say to Perry, Perry, Tell me about the sentence. It's got to have what?
It must make sense, have a who or what, and a what doing.
Amazing. Okay. So now watch me. Here's an image. I'm going to write a sentence that matches this picture. Actually, maybe Carolyn, since you're closer to the camera, I'll write it. And then maybe you can hold up your board. Copy this. So this is teacher modeling first. The cat is stretching. So let's read it together.
Is stretching.
Okay, does my sentence make sense? Talk to your partner. Does it make sense? What's the who and what's the do? Okay, so Carolyn, does my sentence make sense?
Yes.
Does it have a who?
Yes. The cat.
Okay, does it have a do?
Yes. The stretching. The cat stretching.
Okay, so we're going to try one. That's me practicing. So now we're going to do this one together. So take a look at the picture. With your elbow partner, you're going to create a sentence to go with this picture. What are we going to make sure is in our sentence? Perry?
A who and a do.
Okay, so you have some whiteboards at your table. Everybody's going to write just one sentence to match that picture.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, flash forward. My drive is. Hopefully they're learning it as we go, or they could pick it up from their partner maybe. But we're good on that. I'll show you.
Okay, how we do? So maybe, Teresa, do you want to share your sentence? The dog is swimming. Okay, everybody, let's read that. Let's say it out loud. The dog is swimming. Okay, who's the who in Teresa's sentence? What's the who? The dog. What's the dog doing? Amazing.
Swimming.
Okay. Again, we do this again. I'm just checking my time. How am I doing, Perry?
Good.
So we would do this again. Now it's still we do. So as a class, everyone's going to come up with a sentence for this image. Check, does it make sense? Does it have a who? Does it have a do? Another image. Make a sentence for this one. We do it together. And again, pointing out there's lots of repetition, lots of practice where they do it with you. Right? We do so they could talk to their partner, pick someone to read their sentence out loud. Have the class tell you, does it make sense? How do you know? It should have a who and a do. This is a fan favorite. Usually in every lesson, there's an opportunity where you can edit the slide and put images maybe from an area, content area you're learning about in class. So whether that's science, social science, math, and have the kids write a sentence about that. Often, students love pictures of themselves, so I usually take a photo of the kids and put it up in the deck, and then they have to come up with a sentence for that. And that's it for the lesson. I'm switching gears over to Perry or Carolyn.
Oh, you have a bit more method, I think.
I was so excited now.
And I want to just mention that in the beginning of the foundation lessons, which we also love for the beginning of grade 1, all of that work is oral. So as students are becoming more proficient at spelling and printing, they're still having the opportunity to learn about sentence structure orally. So two syntax lessons a week when each group was in the instruction phase. And you might be wondering, well, what did classes do during the control phase or when they weren't in the instruction phase? So teachers were interviewed, they continued with regular writing instruction. And when teachers were interviewed about what this entailed, teachers in the waitlist control group said they engaged in informal teaching of sentence writing, and they modeled sentence writing to students. They said they tended to do this instruction with students when they were introducing a writing task. It's interesting that the instruction first group, they tended to review concepts from the syntax project that they had already taught students when they weren't in their instructional phase. And they did this review also when they were introducing a writing assignment or task. So really they continued on with a focus on learning about sentences after completing the syntax project lessons. And they also, if you look at the screen there, they also did more of it. So they did a medium of 3 lessons a week as compared to, and 15 minutes in length, as compared to 2 sessions a week, 10 minutes per session for the waitlist control group. At the pre, mid, and post-assessment time, a personal narrative writing sample was collected from each of the students, and the sentence combining, spelling, and oral expressive vocabulary measures from the Wyatt 3 were administered by the research team. And Perry's going to talk a little bit about how the writing samples were analyzed.
Thanks, Carolyn. So to analyze the writing samples, we had a graduate assistant. We had 2 graduate assistants do each of the ratings independently, and then we checked for good inter-rater reliability. This is one of my favorite stories. This came from one of the girls in the study. She said, "I went to Toronto with half of my family. It was so much fun. It was a girls' day off of boys. We invited some of my mom's friends." And so to analyze this, we identified the sentences, the clauses. We did a count of how many words were in each clause. We checked whether there was a correct initial capital for each sentence and a correct final punctuation. And there was also a holistic rating of each writing sample. So one of our first research questions was, did the syntax project improve the complexity and correctness of student sentences? So the first result I'm going to report was no, unfortunately. This was one of our unsuccessful pieces. So students completed the Wyatt 3 sentence combining task. You can see here the pre-test, the mid-test, and the post-test. So the y-axis is the student score on Wyatt 3 sentence combining. You can see that at pre-test, both groups were scoring between 1 and 2. At mid-test, the 2 groups were scoring. One was at about a 2.8 and the other was at about a 3.5. And then somewhat similar at post-test, and those scores were not significantly different. We think that what was happening with the sentence combining task is that it's a difficult one for grade 1s. Grade 1s found this task requires students to take initially 2 simple clauses and combine them to form a compound or complex sentence. A lot of students also found the task puzzling. Even after it was modeled for them, they didn't seem to understand the instructions. More successful measure was from the students' writing samples, the number of words per clause. So words per clause gives us a measure of the complexity of the clauses and also reflects the meaning that students are embedding into them in the form of descriptive words and phrases. So we see here that at pre-test, both groups are writing between 4 and 5 words in each of their clauses. At mid-test, the instruction first group has completed the syntax project, and now they're writing almost 7 words per clause, which is really good for grade 1. The waitlist control group is still writing fewer than 5 words per clause. And then in the second phase, the students in the waitlist control increase significantly, so that at post-test, the waitlist control has largely caught up to the instruction first group, and the scores are not significantly different. The syntax project also had a significant impact on the complexity of student sentences. This variable was not normally distributed, so we've represented it here with a bar graph. The count represents the number of students in each group. So there were about 50 students in each group total. The bars represent, going across the x-axis, the number of compound or complex sentences. So these are sentences with 2 or more clauses. What we see here is that in terms of having 0 complex sentences, that was true of more students in the waitlist control. And then in the instruction first group, more of the students were writing 1, 2, or 3 compound or complex sentences. The grammatical correctness of sentences didn't differ significantly between the waitlist control and the instruction first group. So we see here that that across both groups, it was common for students to produce grammatically incorrect sentences at mid-test. And some students were producing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 grammatically correct sentences. We think that what may have been going on here is that the students were attempting more complex sentences. More of the students were trying to write longer clauses and sentences that had more clauses. And in the course of doing that, they often also made grammatical errors. Correct final punctuation, the syntax project had a positive effect on this. So we see that in terms of having 0 sentences with correct final punctuation, that was more common for the waitlist control. Students in the instruction first group tended to have 1, 2, 3, or 4 sentences with correct final punctuation. Correct initial capitals. We see that in both groups, most of the students were writing at least 1 sentence with a correct initial capital by mid-test. And it was significantly more common for kids in the instruction first group to have 2, 3, or 4 correct initial capitals. We were also interested in the impact on written composition. Dil showed you the first lesson in the, was that number 1? Yeah, first lesson in the syntax project. But we also did some transfer lessons for written composition. So 4 times during the syntax project, as kids were doing their journal writing, right, writing a story in their journal, we asked teachers to remind kids before and also during their writing to try the new type of sentence that they had learned while they were writing in their journal. So then we tested them on, or we measured the holistic quality and the length of their composition at mid-test and post-test. So here's the impact on holistic quality. So holistic quality here was measured on a scale from 1 to 9, where 5 was average. So we see that at pre-test, both groups had an average holistic quality of around 3.4. After participating in the syntax project at mid-test, the kids in the instruction first group had improved significantly. So their average score was close to 5. Students who were in the waitlist control had improved less in holistic quality. Then phase 2, the waitlist control group participated in the syntax project, and they somewhat caught up with the instruction first group. And so they were not significantly different at the end of the study. Our biggest single effect in the study was on the length of students' written texts. So we see here that at pre-test, kids in both groups were writing an average of around 10 words in their stories. After participating in the syntax project, kids in the instruction first group were writing an average of about 23 words, while kids in the waitlist control were writing an average of about 13 words. So that was a significant gain with a large effect size. Then in phase 2, the kids in the waitlist control group improved significantly. So they mostly closed that gap. And so at the end, kids in the instruction first group were writing an average of 30 words in their stories, and kids in the waitlist control were writing an average of about 26, which is quite good for grade 1. Something interesting here, Carolyn talked earlier about the possibility of carryover effects. And so we see here that during the second phase, the instruction first group was continuing to improve. And we think that may have been because the teachers were continuing to review the syntax project skills with kids and encouraging them to apply them in their written composition. Thinking back to the interactive dynamic literacy model by Dr. Kim that we talked about at the beginning, what we're seeing here is a strong impact of teaching sentence writing on written composition. And so that sits well with the interactive dynamic literacy model, where sentence production is considered to be a direct contributor to written composition. We were interested in the impact of the program on students who had different skill levels. So we're going to talk here about what happened to students who had different levels of spelling and different levels of oral vocabulary. So here's a graph of spelling. Across the x-axis is the student's Y@3 spelling. So a typical kind of score in grade 1 would be 6. On the y-axis here, we see the mid-test words per clause again, that measure again. You can see that both graphs rise from the left to the right. And so what that's showing us is that the students' spelling skills impacted the complexity of their clauses in words per clause. Over most of that range, what we see is that the red line is significantly above the blue line. So that means that at mid-test across the range of most levels of spelling skill, kids in the syntax project were scoring higher on words per clause. The interaction of spelling with instruction was not significant. And so that suggests that the syntax project was effective for kids with a wide range of spelling skills. When we look toward the bottom of that distribution, so down around 0 to 3, the lines cross. So that trend is not significant, but it does look like possibly if we had a large number of students with a low skill level, we might have found that there wasn't a significant effect of the syntax project for those students. But here that trend was not significant. It tended to be, syntax project tended to be overall significant across levels of spelling. We did a similar breakdown with oral vocabulary. So here we see on the x-axis the kids' Y@3 oral vocabulary. Again, on the y-axis, words per clause. And the pattern that we see here is that toward the upper end of oral vocabulary, so kids who have an oral vocabulary of 7 through 10, we're not seeing a significant impact of the syntax project. Conversely, for kids who have a low oral vocabulary, so kids whose oral vocabulary was down around 0 through 4, we are seeing a significant effect of the syntax project. So we interpret this as suggesting that kids who start with a low oral vocabulary may need the syntax project more and may benefit from it more. We don't want to make too much of that because the significance level there is 0.08. So it's trending toward a significant effect, or it's a marginally significant effect. But that's something that we would want to look at in future research. We also interviewed the teachers on the validity of the syntax project. And so the way we interviewed them is we would start with a statement, like the syntax project has important educational objectives, and we asked the teachers to rate that from 0, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree, and then we asked them in what ways, so to comment further. So the syntax project has important educational objectives on a scale of 5. All of the teachers rated it 5 out of 5, so they strongly agreed with that statement. Some common comments were that it taught kids initial sentence writing and it taught parts of speech. The syntax project helped struggling students improve their sentence writing. Again, mostly positive, so median rating of 4 out of 5, but more mixed, with one teacher rating it as low as 2. So the comments here, a positive comment was that struggling students learned skills from the program. An example of a more negative comment was that some students had a lack of prerequisite skills, so they had difficulty participating in the program. Syntax project was engaging for students, again, mostly positive, median score of 4 out of 5. Typical positive comment was students liked writing about the pictures. A more critical comment was some lessons were long or repetitive. Overall, I would recommend this to other teachers. So all 10 teachers, 5 out of 5. Some of them said they'd already recommended it. They said they'd use it again. It was a unique resource, and so on. I asked them if there are any changes they would make to the syntax project, and most of the changes they suggested arose from the research project rather than from the syntax project itself. So particularly teachers in the waitlist control often said they would prefer to start the program at the beginning of the year. No one likes to be in the waitlist control group. They also said, and many of the teachers had done this already, was breaking longer lessons over 2 or 3 sessions. Okay, so I'll turn things over to Carolyn now for the discussion.
Thanks, Perry.
Yep.
So we, as a system, we are recommending to teachers to use this resource. Mainly, or one of the main reasons, is because it does address the curriculum expectations in that 2023 curriculum. This study showed that it improved the complexity and correctness of sentences, as well as the quality and length of written composition in students' writing, and that it was effective for students with moderately low to high skill levels. I also think, for me as a teacher, really important that classroom teachers found it to be a valuable resource. Perry talked a little bit about some reasons why we think maybe that there wasn't an impact on grammatical correctiveness. So maybe students were trying to write more complex sentences, or perhaps their spelling, where their spelling was at, impacted the grammatical correctness. So for example, if they didn't know how to use the suffix ed for the past tense. We, in the study, teachers, the 10 teachers used 18 lessons that were published then, and since then 4 additional lessons have been published. One thing that we talked about is that maybe that Wyatt 3 sentence combining task was too unfamiliar for students, so possibly there's a different measure or a better measure that we might use. And then another piece coming out of this that we've talked about a lot is it's such a great resource, and also we want to, there are other pieces to writing instructions. So we wouldn't want it to become like, this is only what I'm doing to teach writing in the classroom, because there are other pieces. We, in our system for pre-2023 curriculum, we created a literacy framework, a daily literacy framework. And then when the curriculum was released, we connected the framework to pieces that are in the curriculum. But you can see there in that last column, composition, we do reference the syntax project as a resource, and because it's really good at hitting those overall, that overall expectation B3, but the expectations in D would be better served by using a strategy like self-regulated strategy development. So again, just visually showing that teaching syntax is important, but it's not everything in teaching writing. These are some things that we're thinking about from a systems level in terms of writing instruction. We're wondering, like, what would a year of effective writing instruction look like in a typical grade 1 classroom? So again, we like the syntax project. We like self-regulated strategy development. What would it look like if we put that together in some kind of a long-range plan? Would that be a support to teachers? We're thinking about how we might support teachers in integrating explicit writing instruction into content areas, because we know that's important to teach writing in an authentic setting, in that building content knowledge is important for reading and writing. And this request actually has come from quite a few teachers about having exemplars of student writing that as professionals we could talk about together in terms of assessment, right? So here's a writing sample. We have an achievement chart in our curriculum and the expectations. So if we were going to evaluate that piece of writing, how would we do that in the context of our curriculum? We wanted to make sure everybody knew how to access the syntax project. We're so grateful to that team of Australian educators who developed it. Thank you. And there's 2 places you can find it: on the Ochre Education website, and then Melinda Hinch in Ontario SLP, she Ontario-fied the slide decks, and they're available at OnLit. And I also, before we take questions, I wanted to say thank you to the 10 educators from our board who participated in the study. It's above and beyond the amazing things you do in the classroom every day, and it really has contributed to our systems understanding and knowledge about teaching writing. So we'll have a big impact, not only in your own classroom, but beyond. So thank you. Yeah, and thanks to Perry for always supporting us in our research, taking our wonderings and helping us research them.